HOA Karen pepper sprayed my Army father, claims his mobility scooter was a threat. I never thought I'd be writing about something like this, but here we are. My dad, a retired Army veteran who served for 25 years, got pepper sprayed by our HOA board president because she claimed his mobility scooter was a dangerous vehicle. I'm still angry thinking about it, but at least justice was served in the end. Some background. My dad suffered a severe back injury during his final deployment, which left him with chronic pain and limited mobility. He can walk short distances, but needs a mobility scooter for anything longer than a few minutes. He's still independent and visits me regularly at my house in what used to be a nice, quiet suburban neighborhood. Everything was fine until Karen Mitchell took over as HOA president 6 months ago. She's exactly what you'd expect. Mid-50s, bottle blonde hair in that typical, "can I speak to your manager" cut, and an attitude that could curdle milk. From day one, she started implementing ridiculous rules about everything from lawn ornament heights to what colors people could paint their mailboxes. The incident happened last Sunday when Dad came over for our weekly family dinner. He parked his mobility scooter near my front door, like always. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard shouting outside. I rushed out to find Karen standing in my driveway, waving a piece of paper and yelling at my dad, who was sitting calmly in his scooter. "This is an unauthorized vehicle," Karen was screaming. "It's not allowed in our community." "Ma'am," my dad said politely, "this is a medical mobility device, protected under the ADA. I have every right to use it." "I don't care what you call it," Karen snapped. "It's a motorized vehicle, and it's not permitted on sidewalks or driveways according to HOA regulations." I stepped in at this point. "Karen, that's ridiculous. It's a mobility scooter for disabled persons. You can't ban those. I'm the HOA president, and I say what goes in this neighborhood." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my dad and his scooter. Dad remained remarkably calm. "Ma'am, I suggest you review the Americans with Disabilities Act. What you're doing is discriminatory and illegal." That's when things went completely off the rails. Karen reached into her purse and pulled out a small canister. Before either of us could react, she pepper sprayed my father directly in the face. "He was threatening me," she shrieked as my dad cried out in pain. "Did you see how he tried to run me over with that thing? I was defending myself. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My 62-year-old disabled father, who hadn't moved an inch from his scooter, was now doubled over in agony while this crazy woman was screaming about being threatened. "Someone call the police," Karen yelled, trying to make herself sound like the victim. "This man tried to assault me." "Oh, they're already on their way," said my neighbor Tom, who had been recording everything on his phone from his driveway. "Been filming since I heard the shouting. Got the whole thing on video, including you assaulting a disabled veteran without provocation." The police arrived within minutes. Karen immediately launched into a dramatic performance about how she was just doing her job as HOA president when my aggressive father tried to run her over with his unauthorized vehicle, forcing her to defend herself. The officers weren't buying it, especially after Tom showed them the video. It clearly showed Karen as the aggressor, with my dad remaining seated and non-threatening throughout the entire confrontation. The cherry on top was when one of the officers recognized my dad from the local VFW post where they both volunteered. Karen was arrested for assault and taken away in handcuffs, still screaming about HOA regulations and dangerous vehicles. The paramedics checked out my dad, and thankfully, while the pepper spray was painful, it didn't cause any lasting damage. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of Karen's downfall. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about what happened. People were outraged. It turned out that many residents had their own stories about Karen's power trips and harassment, but everyone had been too intimidated to speak up individually. I decided to take action. First, I helped my dad file for a restraining order against Karen, which was granted easily given the video evidence and police report. Then, I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in both HOA law and disability rights. Our lawyer was practically giddy when she reviewed the case. "This is a slam dunk," she said. "Not only do we have clear video evidence of assault, but we also have documented discrimination against a disabled veteran. The HOA is going to have a field day with this liability issue." She was right. We filed both criminal charges for the assault and a civil suit for discrimination and emotional distress. The HOA's insurance company nearly had a heart attack when they received the lawsuit, especially given the video evidence and the fact that Karen had previous complaints about harassment in her personnel file. More neighbors came forward with their own stories and evidence of Karen's misconduct. Security camera footage from various houses showed her measuring people's grass with a ruler at 6 a.m., taking photos of children playing in their own yards, and leaving threatening notes on doors about minor infractions of her made-up rules. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. The room was packed. I'd never seen so many neighbors in one place. Karen wasn't there, as her arrest and the restraining order prevented her from attending. "I've lived here for 15 years, said Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly resident who stood up to speak. "In all that time, I've never felt unsafe in my own neighborhood until Karen took over. Last month, she threatened to fine me because my roses were 3 inches taller than her arbitrary height limit." More residents shared similar stories. It became clear that Karen had been abusing her position to harass and intimidate people throughout the community. The board voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position. They also implemented new bylaws requiring board members to undergo training about disability rights and anti-discrimination laws. But the best part came during the civil suit proceedings. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that she was just zealously performing her duties as HOA president. The judge's response was priceless. "Ma'am," he said, reviewing the video footage again, "in what world does zealously performing duties include pepper spraying a disabled veteran who was sitting stationary in a mobility scooter? The Americans with Disabilities Act isn't a suggestion, it's federal law." The case never made it to trial. Karen's lawyer, seeing the writing on the wall, advised her to settle. The terms were significant: a substantial monetary settlement for my dad, a permanent ban from holding any HOA position in the county, mandatory anger management classes, and a public apology. The criminal charges resulted in Karen being sentenced to community service at, ironically, a veterans support center, plus probation and a fine. She ended up selling her house and moving away, unable to face the neighbors she had terrorized for so long. We used part of the settlement money to install ramps and accessibility features throughout our neighborhood, making it more welcoming for everyone. The HOA even created a new position for a disability rights advocate on the board. Dad still comes over every Sunday for dinner, using his mobility scooter as always. Sometimes he jokes about carrying pepper spray-proof goggles, but we both know the neighborhood is a much better place now. The whole experience taught me something important. Sometimes it takes one outrageous incident to expose a pattern of harassment and discrimination that many people have been silently enduring. By standing up to Karen, we not only got justice for my dad, but helped create positive change for the entire community. Last week we had our first neighborhood-wide cookout in years. Looking around at all the happy faces, kids playing, neighbors chatting, and even a few other residents using mobility scooters without fear, I realized that sometimes good things can come from bad situations. Dad was the guest of honor, and several neighbors thanked him for being the catalyst that finally ended Karen's reign of terror. "I didn't do anything special," he told everyone in his typical modest way. "I just stood or sat up for what was right." Sometimes that's all it takes. The new HOA board had the old "No Unauthorized Vehicles" sign removed and replaced it with one that reads, "All mobility devices welcome." It's a small change, but it represents something bigger, a community that learned to stand up against discrimination and support each other. As for Karen, we heard she tried to join another HOA board in a neighboring town, but a quick Google search of her name brings up news articles about the incident, complete with Tom's video. Turns out, pepper spraying a disabled veteran over a mobility scooter is the kind of thing that follows you around. Our lawyer told us that the case is now used as an example in HOA board training sessions across the state, teaching about disability rights and the importance of following federal law. Dad gets a kick out of that. His story is helping prevent similar discrimination in other communities. The experience changed our neighborhood for the better. People are more involved in HOA meetings now, ensuring that no single person can abuse their position again. We've become a closer community, looking out for each other instead of policing minor rule violations. Tom, whose video evidence was crucial to our case, was elected as the new HOA president. His first act was to simplify the rulebook, removing all of Karen's ridiculous additions. He also started a neighborhood watch program, not to spy on people like Karen did, but to genuinely help keep our community safe and inclusive. Dad still serves as a volunteer at the VFW, where he now gives talks about disability rights and standing up to discrimination. He's turned this negative experience into something positive, helping other veterans understand their rights and the protections available to them. The incident even caught the attention of local disability rights organizations, who now use our case as an example in their advocacy work. They've helped other neighborhoods review and update their HOA regulations to ensure they're fully compliant with the ADA. Looking back, it's hard to believe that someone could be so drunk with a tiny bit of power that they'd assault a disabled veteran over a mobility scooter. But Karen's actions, as horrible as they were, ultimately led to positive changes that will benefit people for years to come. Yesterday, I saw a new family moving in across the street. One of their children uses a wheelchair. Under Karen's leadership, they might have faced harassment and discrimination. Instead, they're being welcomed with open arms into a community that has learned the importance of accessibility and inclusion. Dad just smiles when he tells people about the incident now. Sometimes, he says, it takes someone doing something really wrong to help everyone else do something right. And he's absolutely correct. Our neighborhood isn't perfect, but it's a much better place now, one where everyone can feel welcome and safe, regardless of how they need to get around. All it took was standing up to one power-hungry Karen with a pepper spray can to create lasting change. The best part? Our Sunday family dinners continue without interruption, and Dad's mobility scooter sits proudly by my front door every week, a symbol of victory over discrimination and a reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, eventually prevails. Update. It's been 6 months since I last posted about the incident with Karen Pepper spraying my disabled veteran father over his mobility scooter, and a lot has happened. I wanted to share an update because the story didn't end with Karen moving away. There were some unexpected twists that made everything even better. First, remember how Karen was sentenced to community service at a veterans support center? Well, she tried to get out of it by claiming she had PTSD from the incident with my dad. The judge wasn't having any of it. He actually said, "Ma'am, you chose to assault a disabled veteran. Your claimed trauma from facing consequences for your own actions doesn't excuse you from those consequences." She had to complete every single hour of her community service. The Veterans Center supervisor later told us that Karen spent most of her time organizing files and cleaning bathrooms, always under supervision because nobody trusted her around the veterans. But here's where it gets interesting. Karen thought she could start fresh in her new neighborhood, but her past caught up with her in a big way. She moved to a supposedly upscale community about 30 miles away and immediately tried to join their HOA board. During her introduction speech at their monthly meeting, she started going on about maintaining standards and keeping out unauthorized vehicles. One of the residents, who happened to be a retired police officer, recognized her name and the familiar rhetoric. He did a quick search on his phone during the meeting and found all the news articles about what she did to my dad. When he stood up and read the headlines aloud, Karen ran out of the meeting in tears. The next day, she tried to claim it was all fake news and threatened to sue anyone who shared the story. That backfired spectacularly because it just made more people look up the incident. Tom's video of her pepper spraying my dad had gained quite a following on social media, and someone even made a TikTok remix of her screaming about unauthorized vehicles that went viral. Her new neighbors started putting up signs that said, "Mobility scooters welcome," and "Veterans respected" here all over the neighborhood. She couldn't even leave her house without seeing reminders of what she'd done. Last we heard, she's trying to sell that house too. But enough about Karen. The really good news is about what's happened in our community. Remember how we used part of the settlement money to install accessibility features? That was just the beginning. Our neighborhood has become a model for inclusive community planning. The local news did a follow-up story about our transformation from a Karen-controlled HOA to an inclusive community. They interviewed Dad, who spoke about the importance of standing up to discrimination. The story got picked up by several disability rights organizations, and now other HOAs are reaching out to us for advice on updating their policies. Tom, our new HOA president, was invited to speak at a national HOA conference about preventing discrimination and abuse of power. He brought Dad along as a guest speaker. They made quite an impact. Several communities have since adopted our new bylaws as a template for their own reforms. The lawyer who handled our case has been busy too. She's now representing 3 other disabled residents in similar cases against discriminatory HOAs. She told us our case set a valuable precedent, making it easier for others to fight back against this kind of harassment. Your father's case showed that HOAs can't hide behind their rulebooks to justify discrimination, she explained during a recent visit. The settlement amount in your case is now being used as a benchmark in similar negotiations. Speaking of the settlement money, Dad did something amazing with his portion. After installing the accessibility features in our neighborhood, he started a foundation called Veterans Mobility Rights. They provide legal assistance to veterans facing discrimination over mobility devices and help communities become more accessible. The foundation has already helped 5 other veterans win cases against discriminatory housing policies. One case involved a Marine veteran who was told he couldn't park his adapted vehicle in his own driveway. The HOA backed down as soon as they got a letter from our lawyer mentioning our case. Dad's foundation also partners with local contractors to install ramps, handrails, and other accessibility features at reduced costs. They've helped make 3 other neighborhoods in our city more accessible for everyone, not just veterans. The VFW where Dad volunteers made him their accessibility advisor. He's been working with them to upgrade their facilities and create guidelines for other posts across the state. His experience with Karen taught him that many people don't understand disability rights, so he's made it his mission to educate others. Our neighborhood has changed in other ways too. The sense of community that developed during the fight against Karen has grown stronger. We started having monthly block parties where everyone is welcome. At the last one, I counted 6 different mobility scooters and 3 wheelchairs. People who might have felt unwelcome during Karen's reign are now active members of our community. The HOA board looks different now too. Under Tom's leadership, they created several new positions to ensure diverse representation. We now have a disability rights advocate, a Veterans Affairs liaison, Dad was elected to this position, and a community outreach coordinator. All board members have to complete training in disability rights, fair housing laws, and conflict resolution. Remember Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly resident who spoke up about Karen threatening to fine her over her roses. She's now in charge of the community garden program. Instead of measuring plants with a ruler, she teaches kids about gardening and runs a vegetable donation program for the local food bank. The police officer who recognized Dad from the VFW became a regular at our community meetings. He gives presentations about personal safety and legal rights, and he made sure all the local officers know about mobility device laws to prevent similar incidents. One funny development, our neighborhood has become known as a Karen-free zone. When a real estate agent tried to tell a potential buyer that mobility scooters weren't allowed, another neighbor overheard and set them straight right away. The agent was mortified and apologized immediately. The security cameras that caught Karen measuring grass and harassing residents are still up, but now they're part of a real neighborhood watch program. Instead of looking for rule violations, we use them to keep everyone safe and make sure delivery packages don't get stolen. Dad's mobility scooter has become a sort of neighborhood mascot. Kids wave when he drives by, and some neighbors even decorated their own mobility devices with American flags and veteran pride stickers. It's become a symbol of standing up for what's right. Last week, we had an unexpected visitor, the judge who handled Karen's criminal case. He was in the neighborhood and stopped by to see the changes we'd made. He was impressed by the accessibility improvements and especially liked the All Mobility Devices welcome sign. You know, he told Dad, in my years on the bench, I've seen a lot of cases change individual lives. But what you folks did here, turning a bad situation into positive change for an entire community, that's something special. The City Council recently recognized our neighborhood with an award for community inclusion. During the ceremony, they played a montage of before and after pictures showing the transformation. The before included stills from Tom's video of Karen's attack, contrasted with after shots of our accessible playground, community garden, and various neighborhood events. Dad gave a short speech at the ceremony. He didn't mention Karen by name. He didn't need to. Instead, he talked about how communities grow stronger when they stand together against discrimination. He got a standing ovation, which made him blush and try to hide behind his mobility scooter's handlebars. The foundation Dad started is growing faster than we expected. They're now working with a national veterans organization to create a certification program for veteran-friendly communities. The requirements include accessibility standards, protection for mobility devices, and training for community leaders. Our neighborhood will be one of the first to receive the certification. The ceremony is scheduled for next month, and several news outlets plan to cover it. Karen will probably see it on TV wherever she ends up living, a fitting reminder that her attempt to discriminate led to positive changes she never intended. The lawyer who handled our case says she's writing a book about HOA reform, with our case as the centerpiece. She's interviewed several neighbors about life before and after Karen, and the contrast is striking. People talk about feeling scared and isolated before, versus the strong community bonds we have now. Dad still jokes about the pepper spray incident, but now he uses it as a teaching moment. Sometimes you have to go through the fire, he says, to help others avoid getting burned. It's a bit cheesy, but that's my dad for you, always finding the silver lining. Our Sunday family dinners have gotten bigger. Neighbors often stop by to chat, and we've had to move them to the backyard to accommodate everyone. Dad's mobility scooter sits in its usual spot by the front door, but now it's usually joined by others, a visible reminder that everyone is welcome here. The changes we've made are permanent too. The new HOA bylaws are written to prevent any future boards from reverting to discriminatory practices. We've created a system of checks and balances, with regular community input and oversight from disability rights organizations. Looking back, it's almost hard to believe that one person's hatred and discrimination could lead to so much positive change. Karen tried to drive my dad away because of his mobility scooter, but instead, she ended up bringing our community together and making it a better place for everyone. Dad summed it up best during his last VFW talk. Sometimes the people who try to tear us down end up making us stronger. They just don't expect us to stand together and fight back. As for Karen's pepper spray, we keep the canister she dropped during her arrest in a display case at the community center next to the All Mobility Devices welcome sign. It's labeled Exhibit A, How Not to Run an HOA. It's a reminder that standing up to bullies and discrimination might be scary, but it's always worth it in the end.